What was the sin of Sodom? It was the lack of hospitality. Let's take a journey. The frequent mention of this catastrophe in biblical literature shows that the event left an indelible impression upon the popular mind. Greek and Latin historians like Strabo and Tacitus recorded this event as well. Today, I'm not going to be looking at the historicity of this event. I'm going to hang my hat on and treat the theme. I'm also not going to be doing a deliberate or a detailed verse-by-verse study of the chapters like I usually do in my classes. It took us 3 years just to cover the book of Genesis. I can make that material available to anyone who has the interest, or you could wait for my commentary on the book of Genesis. There is a narrative in the Torah where we see a blatant contrast between how Abraham hosted his visitors and how the people of Sodom hosted the same delegation. Yahweh and his entourage are journeying to Sodom to inspect a particular situation, but they happen to stop by at Abraham's tent. It's the heat of the day, as the text tells us. And Abraham is resting at his tent. As he rests, he lifts up his eyes and he sees 3 travelers, 3 strangers. The text tells us, now Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appeared to him in the plains of Mamre, and he was sitting at the entrance of the tent when the day was hot. And he lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, 3 men were standing beside him. And he saw and he ran toward them from the entrance of the tent, and he prostrated himself to the ground. The Talmudic rabbis say that Abraham was praying to God here in verses 1. If that is the case, it means that Abraham terminated the interaction or the conversation he was having with God in order to offer hospitality to 3 travelers, these 3 strangers. I want you to put that in your spirit because it's going to become extremely important. The man is praying, we are told, by the Talmudic rabbis, and he interrupts his prayer to take care of some strangers. This shows us how so important hospitality was to Abraham, that he allowed this moment of religious ecstasy to be interrupted. Abraham, in doing that, affirmed the important lesson that social responsibility must supersede religious belief and practice, which is articulated in the Talmud. I don't subscribe to the Talmud as the oral tradition for the Hebrews, but because some in the community subscribe to it, I've decided to use it. The Talmud tells us that welcoming guests is greater than welcoming the divine presence. We see that in Shabbat 127a. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, On a related note, hospitality toward guests is greater than receiving the divine presence. As when Abraham invited his guests, it is written, and he said, Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please pass not from your servant. Abraham, in prayer, interrupts his moment with God and went to provide hospitality to these strangers. Interesting. The emphasis here is on Abraham's attentiveness as hosts. His actions included giving water to his guests so that they may wash their feet, offering them rest and food. Once they are refreshed, they may continue on their journey. Such hospitality in the ancient Near Eastern world would not be strange at all. Actually, its absence would be strange and extremely disturbing. Because we know that the host is responsible for his guests. The host is responsible for his guests' needs and safety as long as the guest remains under his roof. Abraham did not know he was showing hospitality to his deity. He did not know he was showing hospitality to angels. They were travelers and strangers. Fast forward. Now Abraham's guests leave to continue on their journey, and a conversation takes place. Before the conversation, a statement is made. Let's listen carefully into the conversation. Genesis 18:17. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said, Shall I conceal from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have known him because he commands his sons and his household after him that they should keep the way of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh to perform righteousness, tzedakah, and justice, mishpat, in order that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh bring upon Abraham that which he spoke concerning him. Why will Abraham be great? Because he's going to teach his children to do what he has just done. What has he just done? The show of righteousness and justice. The show of tzedakah and mishpat. The first use of the term tzedakah in the Bible is here, in the tale of Abraham, Lot, and Sodom. The rabbis, I told you I'm going to quote them a lot today. The rabbis translate tzedakah as charity, given to the needy, generosity. In biblical Hebrew, tzedakah can also mean innocent. But that is not the topic today. We will get to that some other time. I know that you will be great because of what you will teach your children. What would Abraham teach his children? charity, generosity, giving to the needy, hospitality. What he has just shown and demonstrated to these strangers, these travelers. Sadaka umishpat is a single term. It has one meaning. However, the Talmudic rabbis loved to split such phrases. They love to split such phrases and derive extra meanings from each term. So now tzedakah, according to the rabbis, to the oral tradition, interpreted tzedakah as either mercy, forgiveness, or generosity. So today we say, I'm going to give tzedakah, I'm going to give charity. You're giving hospitality. This is what Abraham was chosen to teach his descendants, the way of God, the doing of tzedakah, charity, generosity, hospitality. Abraham did not violate the basic universal justice and benevolence which is owed to needy strangers. So in turn, he is promised a covenant son. Now pay attention to verses 19. For I have known him. God says he has known Yada. He's known Abraham. It does not mean God has had sexual relations with Abraham or he wants to. Not at all. It means that he has investigated him. He has interrogated him. And he's done a good job with the hospitality that he has shown. It's important to note that the choice of the verb yada, know, used here, chosen by the author, is deliberate in light of the context. I would have interpreted yada as a technical term if this was a treaty or covenant, because it is used in treaties and covenant terminology. When it's used in a treaty or covenant terminology, it refers to mutual legal recognition on the part of a suzerain and a vassal. I would have interpreted yada as such if it fits the context, but it does not here. I would have also interpreted yada as to know sexually, but it does not fit the context. He has interrogated him. He has investigated him. Abraham was not found wanting. God then says something to Abraham. Listen in carefully. Verse 20. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said, since the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, and since their sin has become very grave, two concerns are mentioned. Number one, the outcry or the cry, and number two, their sin. Two concerns are mentioned in verses 20. Now, why does God descend, and what does he want to check? He does not leave us in the dark. We read in verse 21, I have descended now, and see, whether according to her cry, which has come to me, they have done. I will wreak destruction upon them, and if not, I will know. Notice that in 20, two concerns are mentioned. In 21, he tells us why he really descended. One concern, one reason. Something triggered him taking a trip to Sodom to go check. And we are told it was because of a certain cry. Just one concern. What is this cry? We are told that God is set on a mission of verification. He's going to investigate a cry. Don't forget, he has just investigated Abraham, interrogated Abraham. Will what God see confirm what he has already heard? A certain cry emanated from Sodom, which aroused God's wrath. What was the nature of this cry? What was the nature of this cry which led to the destruction of Sodom? What cry has the power to bring about the destruction, the annihilation of whole cities? Let's find out. The rabbis tell us from the Talmud, Shabbat 109b, there was a young woman who would take bread out to the poor people in a pitcher, so the people of Sodom would not see. The matter was revealed, and they smeared her with honey and positioned her on the wall of the city, and the hornets came and consumed her. And that is the meaning of that which is written. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Genesis 18:20. And Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, Rabbah is an allusion to the matter of the young woman who was killed for her act of kindness. It is due to that sin that the fate of the people of Sodom was sealed. So according to the Talmud, according to the Talmudic rabbis, the cry God descended to investigate was not that of homosexual acts. The Talmud, which some of you subscribe to as the oral tradition of the Hebrew people, tells us that the cry was not homosexuality. It was a cry from a woman who showed charity, hospitality to the poor. Now, the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, the Ramban, in his commentary on verses 20, identifies the cry with the cry of the poor and the oppressed. What does Ramban say on verses 20. It was the intention of the people of Sodom to prevent visitors from coming among them. Sodom benefited from rich and fertile land and was a very affluent community. They, however, detested charity and were unwilling to share any of their wealth with outsiders. They thus decided to forbid the entry of foreigners into their lands. The root of Sodom's wickedness was not sexual perversion nor bloodthirsty viciousness for their own sake, but rather greed. So the Ramban, basing himself on a midrash of the sages of the Talmud, explains the motivation of this behavior of Sodom. What was their motivation? It was not sexual perversion. Now let's stay with the Talmudic rabbis. Have Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. In chapter 25, he tells us, they issued a proclamation in Sodom saying, everyone who strengthens the hand of the poor and the needy with a loaf of bread shall be burnt by fire. Pelotit, the daughter of Lot, was wedded to one of the magnates of Sodom. She saw a certain very poor man in the street of the city, and her soul was grieved on his account. What did she do? Every day, when she went out to draw water, she put in her pitcher all kinds of provisions for her house, and she sustained that poor man. The men of Sodom said, how does this? When they ascertained the fact, they brought her forth to be burnt by fire. She said, sovereign of all worlds, support my right and my cause at the hands of the men of Sodom. And her cry ascended before the throne of glory. In that hour, the Holy One, blessed be he, said, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to her cry, which is come unto me. And if the men of Sodom have done according to the cry of that young woman, I will turn her foundation upwards and the surface downwards. Now look at the beginning of the Midrash. It describes a general proclamation forbidding the giving of charity, no hospitality. It was embedded within the very law of the city. It was the very definition of justice in Sodom. The Midrash depicts cruelty as an internal attribute governing the people's relations with one another. Cruelty towards strangers inevitably leads to cruelty towards neighbors. Sodom has no mercy for its own poor. It acts viciously towards its own inhabitants. Their sin is not so much in what they did, but rather in what they did not do. They cared not for the poor within them. This is the cry that God said he heard, according to the Talmud, and he's come down to go check to see whether it was true. Why did the Talmudic rabbis say this? Well, when you look at the Hebrew root, it indicates anguished cry of the oppressed, agonized plea of the victim for help in some great injustice. We see it in Exodus 3. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their slave drivers, for I know their pain. Exodus 22. You shall not oppress any widow or orphan. If you oppress him, beware, for if he cries out to me, I will surely hear his cry. Isaiah 5. For the vineyard of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are the plant of his joy. And he hoped for justice, and behold, there was injustice, for righteousness, and behold, an outcry. This means that the outcry, the cry of Sodom, then implies above all heinous moral and social corruption, an arrogant disregard for elementary human rights, a cynical insensitivity to the suffering of others. Pay attention to this carefully. In your spirit, it will become very important. Let's read some more Talmud. Shabbat 109b. The Gemara continues to discuss the sins of the people of Sodom. They had beds on which they would pay their guest. When a guest was longer than the bed, they would cut him. And when a guest was shorter than the bed, they would stretch him. Eliezer, servant of Abraham, happened to come there. They said to him, come lie on the bed. He said to them, I took a vow that since the day my mother died, I do not lie on a bed. Shabbat 109b 7. When a poor person would happen to come to Sodom, each and every person would give him a dinar, and the name of the giver was written on each dinar. And they would not give or sell him bread, so that he could not spend the money and would die of hunger. When he would die, each and every person come and take his dinar. This is what the Talmud is telling us was happening in Sodom. Now let's look at Pirkei Avot 5:10, ethics of our fathers. It says, there are 4 types of character in human beings, still quoting the rabbis. One that says, mine is mine and yours is yours. This is a commonplace type, and some say it's a Sodom type of character. Mine is mine, yours is yours. One that says, mine is yours and yours is mine, is an unlearned person. One that says, mine is yours and yours is yours, is a pious person. One that says, mine is mine and yours is mine, is a wicked person. So we see that what the rabbis are saying and showing is that this isn't merely an issue of a singular kinky sex act. That is not what we've read. Let's move on to the gates of Sodom. Genesis 19. And the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. And Lot saw and arose towards them, and he prostrated himself on his face to the ground. Now, what was Lot doing sitting at the gate in the evening? Well, the rabbis of the oral tradition, the Talmud, say that from being in Abraham's house, Lot learned to look for wayfarers, to look for travelers. We see this in the Midrash for Vayere. And the two angels came to Sodom, and he said, Behold now, my lords, turn aside, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet. And then it continues. There is a proverb which says, associate with a greasy man, and you too will become greasy. Because Lot associated with Abraham, he learned to welcome travelers. This is what the Talmudic rabbis are telling us. The reason why Lot is at the gate at that time was because he learned from Abraham in Abraham's house to look for wayfarers. Also, to sit at the gate in the ancient world also meant to be a judge. We're not talking about that now, but it would become important. I repeat it. To sit at the gate in the ancient world also meant to be a judge. So it means that Lot could have been or was a judge. Don't forget this. It would all come together. And he said, Behold now, my lords, please turn to your servant's house and stay overnight and wash your feet, and you shall arise early and go on your way. And they said, No, but we will stay overnight in the street. And he urged them strongly, and they turned into him and came into his house, and he made them a feast, and he baked unleavened cakes, and they ate. We are looking for a show of hospitality, charity, tzedakah. What Abraham did, if you noticed, Lot is doing. But God is here to know the cry, meaning to investigate the cry. So now we are FBI agents with God. We, the readers of the text, we are also taking the journey. We don't know what happens in the future. No, we are just reading it for the first time, and we are taking the walk. We're doing the investigation with God. What happened? When they had not yet retired, and the people of the city, the people of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, the entire populace from every end of the city. Now it's good to point out that this is a mob. A mob is a large crowd of people, especially one that is disorderly and intent on causing trouble or violence. Not shortage of men to have sex with Sodom. That is not what is happening here. It's a mob. And you know how mobs behave. Put that in your spirit. A mob. Verses 5. And they called to Lot and said to him, Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, and let us know them. Pause. God says he has known Abraham. Now the author tells us that the people of Sodom want to know the strangers or the visitors. Remember what I said earlier. The choice of The verb know, yada, is deliberate in light of the context. It's important. Context is important. Yahweh knows Abraham. He didn't have sex with him. He interrogated him. He investigated him. Yet he goes to Sodom in order to know Yada. He's not going there to have sex with him. He's going there to investigate, to interrogate the cry that came up to him. It does not mean they want to have sex with these people. The mob wants to interrogate the visitors and possibly humiliate them. Look at the word yada. It has a lot of meanings. It can mean a lot of things, including to investigate. You see, in juridical context, the term means interrogate. They want to check if the visitors are friend or foe, whether they truly deserve hospitality or are to face hostility. Don't forget this statement that I'm about to make. To know, yada, as a sexual statement is only true in heterosexual relations only. Adam knew Eve is only used in heterosexual relations unless somebody can show me anywhere in the Bible where two people, male and male, are said to know each other. When you go into the esoteric of knowing sexually, you would see that it's impossible for two males to know each other. I mentioned the esoteric because some of you subscribe to the Zohar and the Jewish metaphysical thoughts. No, yada, as a sexual statement, is only true in heterosexual relations only. It's never used for anything else but heterosexual relations when it comes to sex. So yada also does mean to investigate. Now, what we know from the ancient Near East is that an interrogation could often be brutal and even sexually humiliating. I will show you a scene in the book of 2 Samuel. And it came to pass after this that the king of the children of Ammon died, and Hanun, his son, reigned in his stead. And David said, I shall show kindness to Harun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed me kindness. And David sent to comfort him through his servants for his father. And David's servants came into the land of the children of Ammon, and the prince of the children of Ammon said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David honors your father, that he sent you comforters? Is it not in order to investigate the city and to spy it out, and to search it, that David has sent his servants to you? And Hanun took David's servants. Pay attention to what he did. And he shaved off half of their beards. I don't have any problem with that. Okay, I can live with that. And he cut off their garments in half up to their buttocks. Hold up a minute. Hold up. They did what? They thought they were spies. So what did they do to humiliate them? They cut off their garments in half up to their buttocks. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would have anyone, a male, another male like myself, whenever, I don't care when it is, in what situation, I don't think I'll consider any situation here, to cut off my garments in half up to my buttocks. The text is being very nice. You should understand what happened to these fellas. And he sent them away. Verses 5. And they told it to David, and he sent to meet them. For the men were very much ashamed. Of course they should be. This is how brutal interrogation is, or how brutal it was in the ancient Near East. Lot was worried about the potential shaming of his guests, which could also include sexual violence, as we've seen here in 2 Samuel 10. Violence in order to demonstrate power and dominion over male sojourners or outsiders is what the text emphasizes as wickedness, not the so-called homosexual cravings of Sodom and Gomorrah men. No. Let me give you some sources to read on this type of shaming. If you have a chance, you want to read They abused him like a woman, homoeroticism, gender blurring, and the rabbis in late antiquity. Let's read a little bit. This commonly accepted reconstruction of Asian sexuality and homoeroticism assumes a very strong political hierarchy in which the adult citizen males, who, with very few exceptions, are also the authors of the surviving literary text from antiquity, hold virtually absolute political power. To penetrate was to reaffirm, perhaps even assert, this power. To be penetrated was perceived as being as women were perceived, that is, weak and dominated. This is what they thought then. The adult male citizen who also allowed himself to be sexually penetrated, especially in Roman society, was looked upon with loathing. Female-female sexual relations were imagined as involving a female who was a sexual penetrator, that is, a woman who rebelled against her political place within the society. These are some of the sources that you should read on the topic. You should also get this book, Homoeroticism in the Biblical World, a Historical Perspective. It would show you where I'm coming from. The act of two male adults choosing to have intercourse with one another has nothing to do with the violence of the attacks depicted in the story of Sodom, which is really about power over the powerless. That is what they're doing. They're shaming them. They're not here to enjoy homosexual gigs. That is not the case here. it is always key to read the text in context. Lot comes up with a solution. Genesis 19, behold now, I have 2 daughters who are not intimate with a man. I will bring them out to you, and do to them as you see fit. Only to these men do nothing, because they have come under the shadow of my roof. Now, I must say this. Lot is doing accords very well with what we know about Middle Eastern traditions, and specifically Bedouin traditions when it comes to hospitality. In Bedouin law, when someone comes into your tent, when you accept them in, you are fully responsible for them, to the point where if they are killed, you become a blood relative. There is absolutely nothing that allows you to throw them out, with one exception. If they make a pass at one of the women in the tent, then you throw them out to the dogs. In this sense, Lot is really living up to the normal laws of hospitality by saying that they are under my protection, so don't do anything to them. My problem is the inverse of it, which is take my daughters instead. That makes me want to puke. Ugh. That would be a thumbs down for Lot here. But what was his intention? Come to that. Now look at this. Let's use some common sense. If these people at Lot's door are homosexuals, want a homosexual act, then offering his daughters to them don't make any sense. I'll leave that there. What is Lot asking the mob to do with his daughters? He's offering up his daughters. But what is he asking them to do with the daughters? Because they are of no use to these so-called homosexuals. We'll see that that is not the case here. Lot's daughters, he tells them, are virgins. What is the worth of a virgin in the ancient world? A lot. Giving women to homosexuals as a bargaining chip to calm them down seems laughable. It makes no sense. They don't like women. That is what homosexual means, right? But if you're giving them to the mob as collateral, as security, then that makes sense. What is Lot offering here? Take my daughters as ransom. Take my daughters as hostage. Take my daughters as guarantors till the guests leave in the morning, because your problem is with the guest. I will guarantee that they leave in the morning. Lot is using her daughters as human pledges. We do see in Tanakh and Middle Eastern text from this time the notion of a human being as a pledge. The idea that a person is given over as security. This is the same thing Reuben offers Jacob when he wanted to take Benjamin to Egypt. Reuben's mistake here was that his timing was off. Genesis 42. And Reuben spoke to his father, saying, You may put my 2 sons to death if I don't bring him, that is Benjamin, to you. Put him into my hands, and I will return him to you. Reuben is asking Jacob to take his sons, that is Reuben's sons, Jacob's grandchildren, as guarantors. Genesis 43. And Judah said to Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will get up and go, and we will live and not die, both we and you, and also our young children. I will guarantee him. From my hand, you can demand him. You see the difference between Reuben and Judah? They're doing the same thing. Reuben was given his children as pledges, but here, Judah is given himself as the pledge. And who does Jacob give Benjamin to take to Egypt? It was Judah, not Reuben. So when Lot says, Behold now, I have 2 daughters who were not intimate with a man, meaning that they are virgins, he's telling them the value of the human guarantor that he's given them. Lot's daughters are great pledges and valuable. They are of marriageable age, they are virgins, and in their world, they are at the height of value. But they don't accept the pledge because they don't trust Lot. Why don't they trust Lot? Verse 9 tells us, And they said, Back away. And they said, This one came to sojourn, and he is judging. Wait a second. Is Lot a judge? Well, we found out that Lot was sitting at the gate. And I mentioned that in the ancient world, to sit at the gate, not a gate, the gate, could mean that you were a judge, or it meant that you were a judge. So they said, this one came to sojourn. He's a foreigner. He's a stranger himself. And he's judging. Now we will deal even worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard upon the man Lot, and they drew near to break the door. You Lot are even a stranger, and you want to judge us? Are they saying they were going to have sexual relations with Lot as well because they are thirsty for men? No. As we have seen in context, the only 2 people who showed hospitality to these strangers were Abraham and Lot. Abraham wakes up early in the morning to see what happened. Was there anyone who was able to demonstrate any hospitality after begging, negotiating with God? Would you destroy the city even if you find 10 Sadakims? Innocent people. And Abraham arose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord to negotiate. And he looked over the face of Sodom and Gomorrah and over the entire face of the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the earth had risen like the smoke of a furnace. If you were Abraham, you would have been concerned. We, the authors, we know everything because we're reading after the fact. We have inside knowledge. So we would tell Abraham, don't worry, sir. You did good. Lot did not forget what you taught him. He did not forget what he saw you do. hospitality to strangers, travelers, to the poor. Now, don't forget Shabbat 109b from the Talmud, from the Talmudic rabbis. Remember what they said. There was a young woman who would take bread out to the poor people in a pitcher, so the people of Sodom would not see it. The matter was revealed, and they smeared her with honey and positioned her on the wall of the city. And the hornets came and consumed her. And that is the meaning of that which is written. And Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said, because of the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Remember that. It was because of their treatment of the poor, the stranger, the traveler. Now the prophet Ezekiel, speaking in the name of God, powerfully sums up the iniquity of Sodom and Gomorrah as follows. You see, what people would do is they would just go to the place where he says it. But we know better to start from the top of the chapter, Ezekiel 16. We read, Then the word of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh came to me, saying, Son of man, let Jerusalem know its abominations. Okay. The word here is toeva, abomination. This word is used over 122 times in the Bible. I repeat, this word abomination, toeva, is used over 122 times in the Bible. It is used for unclean things, customs of pagans, idols, sins of men, cheating, lost souls, a frowned man. Is used for a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a wicked scheming heart, feet that are quick to sin, a false witness that speaks lies, a sower of discord. It's used for wickedness, a false balance or scale, sacrifices of wicked, the way of the wicked, the thoughts of the wicked, the proud of heart. Don't forget that. Justifying the wicked, condemning the just. It's used for diverse dishonest weights, diverse dishonest measures, refusing to hear the law, prayers of the rebel, eating flesh of peace offerings on the third day. Same-sex acts. Some. It's used for some same-sex acts. Taking ornaments from idols when being destroyed. Any idolatrous practice. Offering an imperfect animal to God as a sacrifice. Any traffic with demons. Wearing clothes of the opposite sex. Bringing the hire of a harlot or sodomite into God's house. Remarriage of former companions, cheating others, making images of idols, idols of Amaah, idols of Moab, idols of Sodom, incense offered by hypocrites, eating unclean things, offering human sacrifices, lying with a menstruous woman, hardness of heart, injustice, robbery, murder, adultery, oppression of others, particularly the poor or vulnerable, violence, breaking vows, lending with interest to a brother. These are all called abominations. And there is more. Notice, and it's very important, the word abomination is not synonymous to homosexuality. I'll repeat that 2 more times. The word abomination is not synonymous to homosexuality. Again, the word abomination, however, is not synonymous to homosexuality. Ezekiel 16, that chapter, uses this word abomination so many times. In verses 22, let's read from 20. Then you took your sons and your daughters that you bore for me, and you slaughtered them for them to eat. Were your harlotries trivial matter? Were your harlotries a trivial matter? That you slaughtered my children and gave them over by passing them over to them? And with all your abominations and your harlotry, you did not remember the days of your youth. Abomination is used here. Is it talking about homosexuality? Not at all. In verse 25, abomination is also used. Is it talking about homosexuality? Not at all. In verse 36, it says your abominable idols is not talking about homosexuality. In verse 43, it says your abominations. Is it talking about homosexuality? In verses 47, it says, if only you had gone in their way, you had done as their abominations, it would have been so very little. But you dealt more corrupt than they in all your ways. What is the abomination? You dealt more corrupt. You dealt more corrupt. That is an abomination. It's not talking about homosexuality. Now we come to Ezekiel 16:48, the verse that Ezekiel, the prophet, tells us explicitly, powerfully, the sins of Sodom. Pay attention carefully. As I live, says Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Elohim, Sodom, your sister, has not done as you and your daughters have done. Behold, this was the iniquity of Sodom, your sister. Pride, abundance of bread, and careless ease were hers and her daughters, and she did not strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. It's interesting. The prophet has confirmed the sin of Sodom in explicit terms. I don't have to interpret a word. I don't have to move from another to another book to find out what Sodom's sin is. The prophet tells me explicitly. He uses words that we all understand. Pride, abundance of bread, careless ease were hers and her daughters. They did not strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Homosexual act is not mentioned here. We continue. And they became haughty. They became prideful and did abomination before me, and I removed them when I saw. Now this is the place where people try to read their presupposed minds, things that they want to import into the book of Ezekiel from the book of Leviticus. We are not doing the book of Leviticus. It's the book of Ezekiel. I'm going to use the book of Ezekiel to explain itself. That is what scholars do. Let the book speak for itself. Because people have been mistaught that the sin of Sodom is homosexual acts, they automatically read abomination here as homosexual acts. This is a poor display of biblical scholarship. We know the sin of Sodom is injustice to the poor, pride, not strengthening the hand of the poor and needy. I repeat them again. Pride, injustice to the poor, not strengthening the hand of the poor and needy. My question to you is, are those acts an abomination? Injustice to the poor, is it an abomination? Pride, is it an abomination? Not strengthening the hand of the poor, is it an abomination? Not strengthening the hand of the needy, is it an abomination? You will be surprised. Let's stay in the book of Ezekiel. We're not reading the book of Leviticus. We're reading the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 18, let's read from verses 5. So a man who is righteous and practices justice and righteousness. These are the words that we saw in Genesis associated with Abraham. It's good to know the Bible, you know. It's good to be studied. It's good to be humble as well. So a man who is righteous and practices justice and righteousness, and does not eat offerings of meals on the mountains, and does not lift up his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel, neither defiles his fellow man's wife, nor approaches a woman in her period of separation, and wrongs no man, what has been pledged for a debt he returns. He has committed no robbery, gives his bread to the hungry, and clothes the naked with garments, does not lend on interest, nor does he take any increase on a loan, keeps his hand back from wrong, executes true judgment between man and man. He walked in my statutes and has kept my ordinances to deal truly. He is a righteous man. He shall surely live, says Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim. Beautiful. Verses 10. If he beget a profligate son, a shedder of blood, and he commits upon his brother any of these crimes, and he does not do all these good deeds, but has even eaten offerings of a meal to the mountains, and defiled his fellow man's wife, wronged the poor and the needy, committed robberies, did not return pledges, lifted up his eyes to the idols, committed abomination, gave out on interest, accepted increase on loans, shall he then live? Pay attention. He shall not live. He has done all these abominations. He's done what? All these abominations. What are the abominations? What is one of them? Wronged the poor and the needy. He shall surely die. Ezekiel tells us that the treatment of the poor, the treatment of the needy is an abomination. So when I go to Ezekiel 16 and I am reading the crimes of Sodom, I follow the context. I don't think about Leviticus. I'm not reading Leviticus. I'm reading Ezekiel. Ezekiel and Leviticus are two different books, written at two different times, but two different authors facing two different situations, addressing two different things. What is the abomination mentioned here in context? And they became prideful and did abominations. It's how they dealt with the poor. Homosexuality is not mentioned here. In closing, Ezekiel uses feminine language to speak of the city and the sisters instead of masculine language. Look on the screen. Like mother, like daughter. You are your mother's daughter. Your sister's sister. Your big sister, Samaria, she and her daughters. Your sister, who was smaller than you, Sodom and her daughters. Ezekiel uses feminine language to speak of the city and the sisters instead of masculine language. By describing the city as a woman rather than a man, the prophet almost unconsciously moves us away from that interpretation. So, in a sense, the Talmudic story, what the rabbis say about the girl who feeds the hungry, gets caught by the town folks, and she's dabbed with honey and consumed by bees, is really a story about the whole city being consumed by its own wickedness. The city is so wicked and so uncaring that it consumes itself by becoming a place which God chooses to destroy. Sometimes some biblical narratives are so familiar to us, we don't realize how well we don't know the narratives. We as readers, we know so much, so it's difficult to forget what we have been taught from the pulpits, what we have read, and analyze the text in context like we've just done. Of course, there are some views that say it was homosexuality. Maybe they have their sources. Maybe they can prove it. I'm not disputing that. At least I've given you the other side of the coin. My job is done. As a teacher, I present information. And it is the responsibility of the audience, the listeners, to take what I present, analyze it, look at the counter arguments, and then at the end of the day, you determine your stance on the matter. This is what teaching is about. I'll be looking forward to read your comments down below. Shabbat Shalom to you all.